Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the I Have a Voice Caregiver Advocacy Series. This series takes place every other Wednesday at 7 p.m. right here on Greater Richmond SCAN's Facebook page. My name is Olivya Wilson. I'm a trauma-informed parent engagement coordinator with Greater Richmond SCAN, and I'm joined by our lovely host, my amazing colleague, Tamika Daniel, who is the Behavioral Health Community Organizer for Greater Richmond SCAN. For those who are joining us for the first time, Tamika is an East End community resident and mother to 4 children. She began advocating for the needs of her son who has autism, which led her to advocating on a larger scale in the 10 years of not being employed. She began as SCAN's Behavioral Health Community Organizer in August of 2019 through a partnership with Richmond Memorial Health Foundation. Utilizing her expertise, and experience, she brings SCAN's work in adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and resilience to the community through training and forums. She also assists in building resilience and facilitating healing through empowerment and connection through a trauma-informed and equity lens. Additionally, Tamika brings her voice and advocacy to meetings and tables throughout the community. I also have the pleasure to introduce our 2 lovely guests, Audrey Hajek and Michelle Walseman. I'll first introduce Audrey. She serves as the Child and Family Advocate Services Coordinator for the Greater Richmond SCAN's Child Advocacy Center. Audrey graduated from VCU with a Master's in Social Work in 2017 and has experience working with children and caregivers who have experienced trauma for the last 3.5 years. Michelle Walseman has a dual role at Greater Richmond SCAN, working under 2 of SCAN's 5 programs. Michelle works part-time with the Child Advocacy Center as a child and family advocate and part-time as a case manager with Richmond CASA, which also stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates. Prior to starting with SCAN in 2019, Michelle worked at the Richmond Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court for 3 years, providing court advocacy for juvenile and adult survivors of family and domestic violence. Audrey and Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. This very important conversation today. I'm going to hand it off to Tamika, who's going to share more about the focus of our discussion today.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. The focus of today's conversation is going to be a little different. As a lot of you may know or may not know, April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. So today's conversation will focus on advocacy and safety, where we'll talk about the warning signs or signs of potential abuse that caregivers can be aware of, while also discussing ways we as parents/caregivers can also teach our children to remain safe. We know safety is both physical and emotional, so we'll also share tips on how to manage our emotions as a way of maintaining safety for self and others. And this is a self-care disclaimer to all of our viewers out there. We are aware that the content of today's conversation can be triggering for some individuals, so please be sure to monitor how you are feeling throughout this conversation. And if at any point you start to feel uneasy or uncomfortable, please know it's okay to take a break from this talk and safely take care of yourself. And at this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Olivia, and we're going to get the questions started.
Thank you so much, Tamika. Really appreciate you setting the focus for our conversation today, and I'm really eager to jump into our conversation. And I really would like to start off our conversation with really kind of getting more of an understanding about this word. We're talking about safety. And so I would like to ask our guests, so this is for both you, Michelle and Audrey, how do you define safety? And this is a 2-part question. So how would you define safety is part 1. And part 2 would be, what comes to mind when you hear or think about the word safety as it pertains to child abuse and neglect?
Sure, thank you, Tamika and Olivia. I can definitely start off chatting about that a bit. I'm Michelle, by the way, since there's the 2 of us on this call. But for me as an advocate and working with parents and kind of in our day-to-day, what we describe that to them is that it really comes down to being protected from harm, right? And having both the emotional and physical space to be free from harm. So we would definitely want to mention that psychological or emotional safety, as you mentioned, is something that's equally as important to consider, right, in these conversations, in addition to physical abuse. So other types of emotional abuse can include intimate partner violence, so violence within the home that children might witness, as well as generally witnessing violence in the home. When we meet with parents, we often have those conversations about what exposures children might have had and how that can affect their safety, both emotional and physical. So the things that you can do to provide emotional safety for your child is really primarily going to be being supportive, right? So ensuring that you're protecting them, ideally, is the first step, in being responsive to your child's feelings, I think, is equally as important. Those conversations about and validating their feelings. We'd also be remiss if we did not mention that, you know, other types of trauma exposure that can impact kids can be homelessness, even domestic violence, as we mentioned, community violence. So those all really have an impact on children's feelings of safety and well-being. But again, the most critical thing that they need in those moments is the support and protectiveness from their caregivers. We know that children really need an environment that not only provides safety, but also that trust and dependability from their caregivers. So if you think about it, children are, you know, as a little one, they're looking to you to provide that for them and the protection. So I think being consistent and setting expectations, validating feelings is all part of that emotional safety piece as well as a caregiver. And to answer the second part of your question, I think, again, coming back to when we think of abuse or neglect, how important it is that a child is not only being actively protected from further harm, but that they're supported in their journey to healing from that experience. So we know in our work that child abuse is a form of trauma and can impact the way children behave and feel, because really they're responding to something difficult that has happened to them and something that poses a threat to their feelings of safety. So we definitely want to consider how we respond to children and how we're supporting them in their healing as we provide safety to them.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I failed to mention online safety is also kind of a conversation that's been happening more and more with the children and caregivers we meet. So I think, you know, that's probably a whole conversation in and of itself.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine. Right.
Just kind of another friendly reminder for parents and caregivers that that's a huge consideration in today's age, to make sure we're monitoring and keeping ourselves in the know about what kids are doing online, and making sure that they understand to come to a loved one or caregiver that they trust when there is, you know, something that makes them uncomfortable online.
Right, absolutely. This was very helpful. I really appreciate, Michelle, how you really started off with just giving us like this very solid foundation, if you will, or understanding of just safety. Like, how do we describe or define safety? And I just love the words that you use to describe it, you know, really saying like, it's just really, it's about protection, right? But you also said, you know, this word of safety is feeling protected, but really encompassing the emotional and the physical safety when it comes to protecting and and not just necessarily shielding one from harm, but how do you also support, right? So that's also a level of safety. So thank you so much for not just defining it, but describing it. And so I appreciate it. And then really, again, connecting it specifically to when we talk about safety as it pertains to child abuse and neglect, what does that mean and what does it look like? And again, adding that support piece is that, how do we help in the healing process of it too? That safety also, we have to look at safety and even the healing process of that. And as Michelle said too, safety, even talking about online safety, I do agree, like that sounds like it can certainly be a whole nother conversation, but it is something that we also want to make sure that we're staying very connected and aware about, is how we protect, children from, the dangers of online, the internet. Would anyone like to add anything as we, before we continue to move on in the conversation? No? Okay, no problem. This is a great start. Like I said, these are already just some really good nuggets. To our viewers, please feel free, type your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to see how we can follow up with some responses. But this is good information already. I want to follow up by asking, what are some signs or maybe potential signs of abuse that are important for caregivers, parents and caregivers to be aware of as it relates to their children? So some warning signs of potential signs of abuse that are important for caregivers to be aware of as it relates to their children.
Sure, thank you both so much. So in thinking about different warning signs, I think it's first important to note that everyone is going to respond different to their experiences in life. So I often say, what might be challenging or hard for me might not be for you, and vice versa. So when we're thinking about trauma, I think it's important to lay that groundwork of just because we may respond one way doesn't mean that it's going to look the same in someone we know or even our child. So some of the things that we talk to parents about is recognizing that trauma impacts our entire being. So that can be impacting our behaviors. It can impact our mood. It can impact our thoughts, our feelings. And oftentimes how that can come out can be through, the most obvious, I think, that we tend to hear about is behavior. So when we're talking about behaviors to look for, just have an awareness of specifically in regards to older kids, I think, recognizing, are they engaging in risky behaviors? Are they engaging in substance abuse related activity? Are they engaging in things online that are, more inappropriate for their age group? Are they having difficulty connecting with peers? Are they having a decline in grades in school? Aggression is another behavior that we can really just talk a while about too, but just paying attention to, I think, behavioral shifts in your child. So I think if you think about kind of their baseline and then identifying if you notice some shifts in that. I think for younger kids, when I talk to parents who have children who are younger, tantrums, wanting to avoid all of a sudden kind of a person or a place. It can be seeking a lot of attention, or it can be pulling away from that attention. It can also be a sign to note if you start noticing regressive behavior, so sometimes toileting, sometimes even talking, you can notice a regression in that as well. So those are all things that we would encourage you to just pay attention to. I think one of the things Michelle and I often share is, these are things to look for and to monitor. It doesn't mean that they will be there, but they could be. And so just paying attention to that. I think also noting that trauma impacts our body as well. So sometimes signs can be, weight loss, weight gain. It can impact the way we eat, the way we sleep. If sleeping patterns change, that can be an indicator as well. But note there also may not be behavioral changes. So we talk to parents as well who, can't really identify anything that has stuck out to them as a change in behavior. And note that that is normal too. It doesn't mean that something didn't happen. There are things that we may be thinking or feeling on the inside that we might not be sharing to people on the outside. So while all of those behavioral indicators are really important, I also think it's really important to note that they may not be there because your child may not be sharing that with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Audrey. That's really helpful. Just to kind of summarize, for those who are just joining, we were talking about what potential warning signs or potential signs of abuse. And one thing that I really heard is that really wanting to look out for these shifts, like as you said, Audrey, these shifts and changes. But then what I'm also hearing is that sometimes they can be really obvious, but then sometimes they can be very subtle, or maybe the signs that we think we should be looking for may not be there as well. And so whether, so noting that these shifts can manifest in behaviors, but then even like mood or temperament and things of that nature, or even our physical body, such as feeling sick or ill, or, other things. So I think that's really, really helpful. Some really helpful information about how to look for those warning signs, but then also understand what those warning signs and how they may or may not show. Because as you said, trauma impacts us in a major way, but it also impacts us in different ways. Very good stuff. Would anyone like to add?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Audrey said, I know for me as a child, I was more so, I didn't experience any type of sexual abuse or anything, but probably more so on the neglect side, not intentional neglect. My parents did the best they could by me with what they knew. But I was that child that, I didn't feel like I could talk to them. So instead of talking to them, I was really sneaky. So it didn't show up. I was one of those children where it did not show up in my behavior. I still got good grades in school. I still was in accelerated classes. I was very quiet, but that was always me. I was always the shy child. So to them, it was like nothing was going on with me. But I was also that child that was started engaging in intercourse at the age of 15. And my parents had no clue. Mm-hmm. And it's not because they really weren't paying attention to me, but it was like you said, sometimes it just doesn't show up. I was still the same child that they were used to seeing over and over. They didn't get calls from the school for me. I didn't start acting out. And the stuff that I did do, I kept it hidden real good. And, some children, we can be very resourceful, and you'll only find out what we want you to find out. So I just want some parents to, I've seen where some can beat themselves up and be like, well, how did I miss this? Mm-hmm. And as you stated, sometimes it won't be there. You can pay attention as much as you want to, but sometimes those signs just aren't there.
Mm-hmm. That's really helpful, Tamika. And so, so it's like, we want you to be aware, right, of the warning signs. If we're someone who just never really thought to look or to pay attention, so it's like we're encouraging ourselves and our parents to be aware, to start looking. But then if we are used to and we have that practice of looking and we don't see it, it's we don't want to, like you said, Tamika, beat ourselves up or be too hard on ourselves if something happens and we did not see the warning signs. And so I appreciate you also adding that extra layer of perspective there about, if warning signs are not visible, doesn't mean that nothing is happening, and it's not your fault that we didn't see it, but we want to make sure that now we start to talk about how do we protect, make sure we're keeping that safety. So going back to the first question, like how do we now support and making sure that we're adding those extra level of safety in place?
Yeah, that's where those relationships come in.
Yep.
If I could talk to my parents back then the way I talk to them now, then I probably would have been able to come and talk to them. But because it wasn't there and I just didn't feel that way. My parents never gave me a reason to not come to them, but I just didn't feel that way. Just by how I was growing up, it was just a lot. But like now, I'm very intentional about making the environment comfortable so my children know no matter what, you can talk to mommy. Yeah. So even if I can't notice anything, they'll feel comfortable with coming to let me know if anything happened.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're going to continue talking about, right now we're talking, we were just talking about warning signs, potential warning signs, but we're also going to get into a little bit more about like, how do we respond, if something happens. But before we get there, I do just want to ask another question, but around maybe some other tips that parents may or may not know about, things that can help us even teach our children how to stay safe. And so we know it's common for parents to use nicknames, if you will. I don't know if there's another language that you all may have, but the best way we knew how to explain it was nicknames when describing or referring to like body parts. When we're talking to our children about their intimate body parts, we might use little nicknames for it. But can you explain to us why it is important to teach children about their anatomy using proper names or terminology, and how that also plays into safety?
Sure. I'm happy to tackle that one. So, and we get this question a lot in our work that Michelle and I do. And one of the things that I really stress to parents is using anatomical names really provides two purposes. I think one is that it empowers the kid to be able to talk about their body without shame. So I think when we're talking about, we name other parts of our body and keep those names, it just helps to, I think, diminish kind of the shame when it comes to talking about our intimate parts, and even kind of breaking down some of the discomfort we have as just a society in talking about those parts of our bodies, and naming them for what they are. The other part, I think, really in regards to safety is it really decreases the potential guessing. So sometimes, as kids, they may feel that they have disclosed something, and often then assume that adults are taking action. But one of the things that we sometimes know is that when there are other names for body parts, other adults may not be aware of what that means. So it can sometimes lead to, I think, some confusion of what the child is trying to communicate. And then the child feels like they have talked about it, and then may internalize that something's not being done. So I think just providing, and us more, I think, in the investigative world, really helping it to be clear, so that if something does happen, there aren't those questions of what the next steps need to be in taking action. So those are the two things that when we get that question, we really try to stress to parents.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I think like those two explanations, like those two reasons for why it's important to use anatomical. Did I say that right? Yeah, something. Anatomical. Look, I'm learning today as well. And so I think it's great that we really have those very two straightforward rationales for why it's important to use anatomical names. Like I love, like you said, you talked about how, number one, it just helps to diminish shame around our body parts. And it helps us just to have more confidence around, knowing ourselves and our body parts more. So really just decreasing the shame around that. And then even more connected to safety is that we want to make sure that children know how to, like you said, it helps to minimize confusion, what I heard you say, Audrey, around, especially when children are trying to disclose, and they may be trying to disclose and maybe to other adults that didn't teach them that words in there, and we don't know what they mean, and so we are interpreting it different, and children could also then see as them, something not being done in response to that disclosure. And I just have another question. I'm also wondering too, you know, I know children, children are considered vulnerable, and I can't imagine what it would be like for, what it has been like for many people who've experienced some violation, right? Around neglect or abuse, and specifically talking about sexual abuse. And if they are, like you said, saying no or trying to even communicate these words, and even their communication, like you said, is not coming clear, even as they're trying to articulate their boundaries and things of that nature, even to peers and to other people. And so I think it's really important that we do teach the proper names of body parts for all of those reasons, and any others that people can think of. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Tamika, did you want to add anything?
No, this is one of those topics where I'm still learning a lot too. So
yeah, for sure. And so thank you again, Audrey and Michelle, for just being here and really offering this education for us. We're learning and want to make sure that it's clear, right? And that it's just really as clear and straightforward as possible. And again, just going to invite those of you who are watching, please, answer your questions, and we'll be sure to make sure we're connecting you with Michelle and Audrey's contact information so that, we can get some responses back to you as well. So we have another question, and we wanted to ask, how do we teach our children to trust people? So we talked about earlier, making sure that we are, making sure we want children to know that they can trust us, to come to us, to talk to us about, situations that are concerning them or that may have happened. So how do we teach children, one, to trust people, and then also teach them that sometimes that trust can be broken, meaning harm can still come from people we trust? How do we teach the balance between the two? We want children to trust people, but then we also know that there's possibilities that people that we trust can sometimes still harm us as well. How do we navigate helping our children balance those two understandings?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that, Olivia, best I can. It is a hard question, I think, to answer, especially in terms that kids can understand that dichotomy, right? So I think a lot of it comes down to what we're communicating to our children. And essentially what we're communicating to them is that we want to empower them to use their voice, and, at the same time having a healthy sense of self, understanding that we can acknowledge that there are people we trust, while at the same time that, we should talk about how body safety is important with our kids, just generally listening to them. I think a huge thing with children is identifying safe people, right? Letting them know, kind of like Tamika said earlier, what me as your mom or whoever the caregiver is, I'm here if you need to tell me something, right? So identifying those safe people so that children have a voice and feel in turn empowered to do so. And it's still, again, I think, Audrey mentioned having the sense for children that they have a voice. And so that's also along the same lines important in this conversation. And also, I think, comes down to safety too. So I can see why that would be a challenge to, trying to explain that to children. But we do want to help them understand the power of no, I think, primarily. So giving them voice and choice. And that can be seemingly simple things in the day-to-day. So for example, if a child is approached by someone and this adult or someone else says, give me a hug, right? Why don't we voice to our children, you have a choice in that, And if someone says, give me a hug, give me a kiss, they have the power to say no to that. And that might seem small in the moment, but it really is building and empowering the confidence of a child. I can speak to, my own experiences as a child, and there was no harm in it, that I was always told, you give your elders a hug, it's respect. But I think at the end of the day, children are little people, but people nonetheless. So they should be able to say that in that moment and be respected. So that's, I think, a good way to incorporate that in the day-to-day, in addition to identifying safe people. So we want to communicate to them in that way that, because there are people in their life that they may know or trust. It doesn't matter if they know or trust them. If they feel uncomfortable, they should be able to tell someone about that. But that is, I can understand, a hard thing to recognize for a child. If I like this person and I trust them, how could they ever do that to me? So it is a hard thing to navigate. I can understand for parents, but we want them to be able to tell us. So there's that balance. So again, I think it comes down to a lot of open and honest communication with our kids, and validating their feelings, right? So if a child comes to you and says, that made me feel weird or what have you, just thank them for sharing with you, validate their voice, and that's just going to build trust between you and your child at the end of the day. So they should be able to have those choices and boundaries respected. And I think incorporating that in their day-to-day is really important and something to be mindful of.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michelle. And we knew that was a hard question because it was a hard concept. One, like you said, when you're teaching your children about trust, and we want them to know that they have, there are safe people in the world, even in their close circle, whether it's their family or close friends, we want them to know that it's okay to trust people and to feel safe around people. But then that we also just have to find ways, right? Yeah. And it's not easy. You have to find ways to still be able to communicate that. Sometimes, like you said, that trust can be broken, or just not everyone is safe. Mm-hmm. But in terms of navigating that, I think that is so key. What you said is that we're teaching, a tool that we can teach our children is how to, one, use their voice and have choice. Whether it's someone that has been identified to be a safe or a trusted person, if you just are not feeling comfortable, right? It's okay, like you said, to say no. I don't want a hug. I don't want to receive or give a hug, or like you said, and then being able to let that child know you can come and be able to validate that whatever felt awkward or uncomfortable, and letting them know it's okay to even just express that. So I think teaching that tool of using voice and making decisions that you don't have to necessarily show these different type of expressions with people just based because of that's what we've been taught, especially like we said, as we're really trying to find and learn better ways to teach children how to keep themselves safe, and also how we keep children safe. Mm-hmm. And that, like you said, that's a hard thing, especially if it goes against norms and cultural norms and traditions, right? Mm-hmm. I see you smiling over there, Tamika. What are you thinking?
Yeah, that one, that's really tough. Like, especially, I'm not gonna say, it doesn't happen to boys, but in some cultural backgrounds, it's focused in more on the girls. So, we hear a lot of, you don't sit in a grown man lap. And it's like, as a child, she wants to go jump on her uncle or sit on her uncle lap, but you got those older adults from different cultures, and they're like, you don't sit on a grown man lap, and the child is looking like, why? They don't understand, and they don't understand why. So I think what Michelle was saying about giving them that voice and that choice, so they can have that discernment of when things, start feeling uncomfortable for them, that it's okay for them to say no, or that made me feel weird no matter who it is. But
Right.
I think it's been so, put on us so much of, these different rules, like you don't sit in a grown man lap, or you don't do this and you don't do that, instead of, like explaining to them, because now they're sitting up there trying to figure out, well, that's my uncle, and or that's my dad, and I see a lot of things on Facebook now where it's like innocent pictures, and it's that's not appropriate, but it's like family, and it's like the lines have been crossed so much. And as you were saying earlier, Audrey, about the names and being less shameful, people have been made to feel shameful about natural stuff. So it's like so many things that are absolutely natural get looked at as bad, and those conversations are not had, and it's confusing. It's really confusing to a lot of children, because instead of teaching them, like Michelle said, to use their voice, it's just straight up, you don't do this.
Right.
I don't care who that person is, you don't do this. So in a sense, they end up growing up with trust issues of everybody around them, as opposed to knowing, it's okay to trust, but still, be aware. And sometimes, the people we love can hurt us, but use your voice and talk to me. So yeah, that one was real touchy. That's a touchy one.
Well, and Tamika, I think you bring up a really good point too about overgeneralizations, right? I think there is this unique balance. And I think also, when we experience trauma ourselves, what we can internalize from that can be like passed along, right? So the things that we feel we're doing out of a protective nature, I don't think it's often intended to be harmful, can sometimes cause children to internalize some of those things, or feel that their world is really scary. And so how do we navigate the overgeneralization of, every person you meet has bad intentions, versus there are some people in life who you may trust and love, and feel connected to, who may hurt you, but here's how we feel safe. And that's where I think, again, the caregiver piece is so important, of that conversation of the listening. I know Michelle had mentioned that, of, if our kids are sharing that information, then it's our responsibility to listen and respond in that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This is so powerful, and I hope that those who are listening in are really feeling empowered with this information that is being shared. I think it's really helpful for us to just continue learning how to better, like you said, educate and find these ways, because it's hard, right? It's hard figuring out how to respond or have these conversations with our children. And with that, these next couple of questions that we have for you, I think really get to an even harder part. And so we're going to be talking about like when, right? So, when something happens and a child is coming to disclose to their parent or their caregiver, we know that that is a really, really difficult situation. So we want to now talk about the response that we started a little earlier. We're kind of coming back to that. Yeah. So I wanted to ask, why is it so important, right, for parents and caregivers to believe their children, immediately, like just, to automatically, if you will, believe their children if they report abuse by a trusted family member. So piggybacking off of the question about knowing who to trust, how to navigate when trust is broken, not overgeneralizing everyone in the world is bad, but that there are some possibilities. So when a child comes, if a child comes to a parent or a caregiver and reports abuse by a trusted family member or person, why is it so important for that caregiver to believe their child? Is the first part of that question.
Yes, another tricky thing, right? It's something we deal with, I think, almost every day, is while we're meeting with caregivers, we will acknowledge that your child is experiencing something hard, and you in turn are going to be experiencing something hard as well. Really, it's important when children disclose to you as a parent or caregiver, they are looking for you to protect them. They've brought this information to you because as the person looking out for them, they're looking for you to, in essence, handle it, right? Mom and dad, whoever it is, this is what happened, and they're expecting there to be some action from it, right? So what we talk about in our work a lot of time is response to that and ways to support your child and validate what they're going through while fully acknowledging that it's going to be challenging at times, right? So there's that other element of you as a caregiver are going to be grappling with it at the same time. But at the end of the day, when a child brings this to you, your response is critical as a caregiver. And I think the first thing to do is first to believe, second to validate their feelings and what they've brought to you. And that's ultimately going to really affect how their healing process moves forward in the way that you respond. So I'll give you a good example. In meeting with parents, this is actually something I've seen quite a few times where their child has been abused. And in meeting with a parent, they will tell me, well, I'm choosing to actively support my child because I went through the same thing and I was never supported, and I know how that felt, right? So there is a huge impact in how a child is responded to in those moments and how they're believed and their future healing and how that impacts them long-term and short-term. So again, coming back to the caregiver element, we fully acknowledge that, you may still feel a connection to that trusted person if it is someone, and so might your child, right? They often have very conflicting feelings, and we could talk about that all day too, about the confusing feelings that a child might have after they've disclosed. But it's going to be a process for them moving forward. So the role of the parent is primarily to believe and support and validate that experience. And a very practical way of doing that is by literally saying, thank you for telling me, right? It can be as simple as that. You're not alone. I'm sorry that happened. I'm here if you need to talk. I'm here for you no matter what. And I'm going to make sure that I do something about this, right? And, it's easier said than done, right? It may be hard in that moment to have that immediate response because you can't imagine all the things that are going through your head, right? When you're hearing something like this in the moment. But I think it's important to take that step back, acknowledge what your child has told you, and ensuring that you're going to make sure that they're safe moving forward. And still acknowledging that those are going to be a mixture of feelings, right? Especially if it's someone you cared about, and that's okay. I think that's a lot of what we do is breaking down that huge array of mixed emotions that caregivers and children experience as they go through something hard like this, and just letting you know it's okay to have conflicting feelings, but primarily getting your child supported through that. And I know that you said the second part of that is how to find support as a parent grappling with that.
Yes.
So I think what we really, depending on, the situation, but a lot of time we really are going to encourage parents to seek professional help. I often tell parents there's no guidebook to these things. It's just something you have to navigate sometimes and figure out what's best for you. But oftentimes that's going to come in the form of professional help to navigate and break down those feelings further, right? So I think that's an important acknowledgement is that it's normal to feel that way. If you as a parent are looking for more internal familial or family support, that's great too. And we often explore that with parents too, what their support system looks like as they navigate through these things. The only kind of caveat to that is, especially with older kids, it's still at the end of the day their story, right? So we just encourage parents to check in with their child before sharing that with someone close to you, and whether that's friends or family, so that they again have that voice or choice. I know we keep saying that, but it's just so important that we acknowledge that choice has been taken away from a child in this traumatic experience. So their story moving forward, they should have a say in. So just checking in and making sure that they're okay with who knows about it. Again, especially with those older kiddos.
That's helpful. Thank you very much, Michelle. I think, like you said, it can sometimes when you hear it, it may not sound like much, but it actually is very impactful. Like you said, the first thing a parent or caregiver can do if they're, when a child a child discloses that something harmful has happened to them, is like you said, first thing is to believe them. And then the second thing is to validate them. And those are like the first two steps that go along with the rest of this process of supporting them through this, through the recovery, or, helping them get through that healing journey. And like you said, it's easy to say, but it's so hard because, as you mentioned, I can't imagine, like you said, the number of like the floods of emotions that are probably like coming in, maybe even, it could be shock. It could feel like being hit by a moving truck. And we don't think that believing one and validating would be the first two things to do. But it's so vital, is what I'm hearing, is so key to really make sure that those are the very first two responses that happen, because that's really going to, like you said, help aid and make sure that child feels supported and protected going forward as they navigate the rest of this journey of being healed and recovering from that traumatic experience. And then I really appreciate you too also offering, like, you speaking to the complex emotions that both the child and the caregiver can have, because we're talking about being violated by a trusted person, whether it's a family member or another trusted person connected to that family. And there could be so many conflicting and complex emotions even around that for both that caregiver and the child. But for the caregiver, there's resources and things in place to help that, navigate that child through recovery. But I appreciate you saying how it's important for that caregiver to also being connected to support as they continue to grapple with, having to acknowledge and accept that someone they too trusted and have a relationship with has harmed, their child. And so seeking professional help would be one of the primary, what I'm hearing, supports. If you were to want to seek internal supports, making sure that you still check in with that child, because it's still the child's story, and that the child has the right to determine who or if that story can be shared with anyone, especially if they're closely connected to the family. So this is, wow, some really, really helpful information. Tamika, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm taking it all in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot to take in for sure. But I also want to be mindful of our time. I know we are nearing the end of our time, but we did just have a couple more questions that we wanted to fit in. If it's okay, if we can hold you two for a little while longer. We wanted to make sure we just talked about this safety piece. As Tamika was sharing earlier, when she was giving us the focus of our conversation, we talked about like the role of our emotions and how we manage our emotions and how that can play into keeping ourselves safe as well as our children. how would you explain the role our emotions play in being able to maintain safety for ourselves and our children? What, you know, what's the, why and how do our emotions have an impact on us being able to maintain safety?
Sure. So I will try to give as brief of an answer as I can, because I think this is a question where I could talk a very long time about. I think firstly, I mean, emotions play a huge impact in our safety. So thinking about as adults, right, we are sometimes not always in tune to our emotions or how our emotions come off. But for kids, they feel that energy. So if you've ever walked into a room where you know maybe an argument has just occurred and that tension is still lingering, and kids carry that. And sometimes what we hear, you know, and know is that kids sometimes internalize, you know, oh, that person's mad at me, right? Because their sense of self is still being established, and it can be hard to decipher, you know, oh, there's tension, so it must be at me. So oftentimes we know that kids take that on for themselves. So I think when we're talking about, you know, safety, and specifically, you know, psychological and emotional safety, we have to bring in emotions. And I think even jumping back to, you know, with the previous question and thinking about disclosure, you know, the emotion we have there can lay a lot of framework and groundwork for what happens moving forward. So I think a lot of, you know, what we work on and talk to parents about is really even modeling and normalizing emotions. So emotions aren't bad, right? We have them for a reason. They are not bad. There aren't anything that's negative about emotion. It's the way we maybe respond with those emotions. But I think normalizing, you know, yeah, this is really hard, right? You know, I'll tell parents, you know, I have parents that say to me regularly, you know, well, I can't act sad because then, you know, their world will fall apart. And my counterpoint to that is, you know, it can be really powerful for a kid to know that, you know, I'm sad, and that's an okay feeling to have. So I think helping to normalize, and then also just modeling it for them. You know, kids look to us on how to respond to our emotions. So kids often, you know, feel things, but they don't know how to express it, except for usually through behavior. So modeling, you know, oh, when I'm sad, it's okay to cry. It's okay to talk to somebody. Just gives and empowers kids. Again, I think choosing what they can do with that and modeling that for them. And so that's what I would say about that in a really brief version. But yeah, they're just really important.
Yeah, that's key. You brought up a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have even really thought of, because I think when we talk about emotions, like you said, one, it's okay. It's important just to be aware, right, of our emotions, and you know, and what children could be walking into and how that impacts them in general. So just making sure that we are, you know, intentionally working on how to just manage our emotions well, right? And what that impact can be on children psychologically, emotionally. But then I also heard you say, Audrey, that, you know, showing emotions, right? So not just making sure we're learning how to manage our emotions in a healthy or in a safe way, but that when we do that, we're doing it to show, to validate that these emotions are okay to have, and then modeling how do we handle these emotions, whether they are hard or soft emotions, you know, because I don't like to call emotions negative either. We used to say negative and positive, but no, all emotions are normal, right? They're part of the human experience. Some may be a little bit more uncomfortable, and others are harder than others. And it's okay to experience, right, to feel those emotions. And we want children to know that. And so thank you. Like you said, I think this is something that we could probably go on and on and on, you know, because it's just so hard, right, to help just any of us, but especially when we're talking about caregivers in terms of, you know, keeping our children safe. We want to try to, like you said, be strong, if you will. You know, I can't, be strong. And I love the counter that you give to your families that, perhaps, by you not showing emotion might be sending a message to your child that they can't show emotion about something that's really hard and uncomfortable. So it's probably better to go ahead and show that emotion and then teach them or model how to make choices based on managing or how to respond, using a better word, how to respond to those emotions. So that is powerful. That is key. I think that's something that we're going to be talking about forever and ever, because it's always something new to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just piggybacking off of Audrey, that is very important. And I had to learn that because a lot of times it's always the household thing where, the adults have to keep everything in. Kids can't know anything that's going on. It's not their responsibility to, deal with stuff that's going on with adults. But I learned that when I was bottling up everything and trying to hide everything that I was dealing with from my kids, that it was showing up in not so good ways. So they may come at me at a time where I just got finished arguing with somebody. I ain't had no business arguing with them, but I done been arguing, and now they done caught me off guard. So I done snapped at them for no reason because I haven't dealt with it. I have not dealt with it. I didn't show it. I didn't let it out. And it's like once I started letting it out, and just even crying, at first I thought it was a bad thing, but my daughter, she'll come in and she'll rub my back, and I'm like, this is normal. Me crying. And my daughter asking me, am I okay? And me saying, yes, mommy just sad for a little bit. That's normal. So, and it's developed a bond with me and my children. They're a little overprotective now because if anything goes on, it's, mommy, are you okay? Mommy, are you okay? But it's not any of the, now they're catching backlash. But Ma, are you okay? Or Ma, it's gonna be okay. So I definitely agree with that.
I appreciate you saying that, Tamika. And I think that that's a great example to even go along with what Audrey said, that, how children can, especially our, younger children who are still developing that sense of self. And so they may walk into a situation and it could be obviously about something else, but they might internalize that. And so even when we are, like you said, learning how to better release or show our emotions and modeling how to take care of it, I think that also helps the children learn how to not internalize it as well. So like when your daughter to me comes and rub you back and say, mommy, okay? And you can say, yes, mommy's sad. Something happened, it has nothing to do with you, but thank you, for showing me comfort. I appreciate it. So it's showing daughter, well, I didn't cause mommy to be sad, but mommy felt good when I comforted her. And so I know that that's what I should expect when I'm feeling sad.
Yeah.
You guys are awesome.
Great point.
Absolutely. So just to wrap it up, we just wanted to make sure that as we come to a close, we always like to end our conversations with just making sure that there are resources. And so we just wanted to ask a follow-up or a closing question, if you will, just about how do you help families get connected to the resources that they need? And if you want to highlight any other resources that we can share with our viewers, that would be great.
Sure. So for Michelle and I, the way that we really connect families to resources is a little unique because we work with investigators. So when families come to us, we have received a referral from law enforcement or CPS stating that there has been a disclosure of abuse or neglect. And so what our role is in working with caregivers is walking them through a lot of what we talked about today, but then also conducting screenings. So screenings help us really determine what services might be most appropriate for the families we're working with. And then our role is to maintain contact with the family as long as they may need, and really providing that case management services. So helping connect them to resources in the area. For most of our families, that is how we do receive those referrals. We certainly do have times where families will call in stating that they're looking for counseling, and we can certainly direct them to the community partners we work with on a regular basis as well, and can share their information. There are some resources Michelle and I put together that we're happy to send to Olivya and Tamika for them to distribute to people, but really things like the suicide hotline number, crisis numbers, community service boards, which are great resources for a lot of the families we serve, as they can offer a variety of different services, one of them being therapy, and they often have shorter wait lists. So that's something you can walk in the same day and complete what's called same day access, where you can complete an intake that day and get connected to services. So those are really good resources as well as just the National Abuse and Neglect Hotline. So if you were in a situation where you would need to report any of that, we have that for you as well. And then the Regional Domestic and Sexual Violence Hotline number as well. So I know that was a lot that we just rattled off, but we will share those with you all as just some of the resources we tend to use on a regular basis, in addition to the things that we do here with our caregivers.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And yeah, we'll definitely make sure that we add this information in the chat. Any parting words? Any final words that you would like to share with our viewers as before I turn it over to Tamika to close us out officially?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having us both. Michelle and I are very passionate about this topic, and I think if there's one thing I'd want to share with caregivers is to also, be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself. I think as we are talking about this from our professional standpoint, we want to recognize that this is involving some unlearning and maybe relearning some things. And so also just, being kind to yourself in that journey, and know too that there are people in the community who are great resources who can help you navigate that. And like I mentioned earlier, Michelle and I would be happy to answer questions that people have. And just thank you for listening and being willing to take in this information.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. Everything Audrey said, I agree 100% with. It's all a journey and a learning process. So, again, there's no rule book, guidebook to these things. And I agree that patience with yourself is vital in going through something like this. So, yeah, thank you all so much for having us.
Thank you. Tamika, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you guys so much again. And we've come to the end of our time. And I just want to thank you again, Michelle and Audrey, for taking the time to chat with us on this really important topic. This was one of those topics that I'm still learning a lot about myself. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you found this conversation informative and empowering. And we will be back on May 5th at 7 p.m. here on Facebook Live for our next topic, which will be advocacy and wellness. Take care, and we look forward to staying connected with everyone.
Thanks. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.